Legendary weapons in WoW were always the most sought out items, the rarest, the most powerful, and so on. But once new patch, or rather expansion, comes out, they are usually exchanged for the most pathetic and uninteresting weapon. We're gonna look at certain legendaries that, in my opinion, should be also wielded by certain lore characters and not just rot in players' bank. What we are not going to talk about are weapons that have been or are wielded by lore characters such as Atiesh, Virala, or Sulfuras. Artifacts belong also to this category because they have already some extensive lore and usually they were wielded by lore characters. You can just take a look at Doomhammer and Stromkar or even Ashbringer, for example. Now, why is this important? Why do I think this is worth making video on? First, these weapons hold potential. Potential for good story. And also, these weapons may make some characters more interesting. For example, if we have a member of Council of Six who is constantly Frost Mage and does literally nothing but sometimes joins on an adventure and otherwise not very known, now this character may seem more interesting. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. And we will start with an axe. Axe that was crafted from hammer that was once wielded by Arthas Menethil. That weapon is of course Shadowmoon. After we managed to get all the fragments and so on, craft Shadowmoon, the story ended. And with it, it was just given into players' hands, never to seen again. Which I believe is quite a shame. In the hands of Nazgrim, or Scourgeman, or Terangorfin. I think you probably heard about Nazgrim and Terran, but I believe many of you don't remember Krog Scourgeman. After all, he is lonely NPC in Wrath of the Lich King. He is champion of the Ebonblade. Champion who never showed us anything. He could be one of those characters, one of those Ebonblade characters that we can appreciate. He can be something more than he just is. And I believe that it could be his time to shine. But maybe I am exaggerating. And he shouldn't even get any spotlight after all. When it comes to Terran, there's much broader horizon in which we can speculate. Terran, after all, was first generation Death Knight who is stronger on necromantic side, which could tie easily into the Shadowmoon power. Because Shadowmoon, if we would look into power of Shadowmoon in a similar way to Frostmourne, then it has the soul power. And this soul power is what drives Terran. We've seen in his boss fight in Black Temple that he is strong on the soul spark. After all, in life, he wanted to eat as many souls as he could, seeing what happened in Alternative Draenor. And this could easily tie into him being a villain. A villain that would have some kind of background, that would bring the past of Blizzard from Warcraft 2 and so on onwards to modern game. But who knows? I believe it could be a great idea. After all, for Terran, the wheel of death spun many times. And now lastly we are getting into our last potential wielder for Shadowmoon, and that would be none other than General Nazgrim, who fell during Siege of Orgrimmar. He was risen at the beginning of Legion invasion. He became one of the crucial members of Ebonblade, seeing as he became first of the new Four Horsemen. That would be ideal if that first one would get this kind of weapon. But that would bring the Four Horsemen into imbalance. Because suddenly it would be Nazgrim and other horsemen. Because of that, I believe that other horsemen should also get some weapon, if we would go by this logic. that does gain shadow mode. White Mane could get some kind of scythe that could put her into a position that she would look like more like first generation Death Knight, as we covered in Terran part. She could also look like Death itself, as the Necromancer. Then we would have Thoras Trollbane and Darian. Thoras Trollbane could get some kind of big two-handed Runeblade, and lastly we have Darian, who could get fragments of the first one if they still hold some kind of power. And now for the potential stories. Those stories would of course depend on who would be the one wielder who gets the weapon. When it comes to Krog, he could be he would need to return back into the story. That's the first thing. Second thing, it would be kinda nice to give it to him because of his connection with Icecrown Citadel, since he was the one who led our troops against Sindragoza, against especially Sister Svalna, that was standing before Sindragoza. Then, Terran part, of course, he would also need to return in a way that would feel satisfying, and he wouldn't feel like some kind of weirdo who just appears out of nowhere. And as I mentioned, I'd love to see Terran come back as a villain, because I believe he could be a phenomenal villain if written correctly. And lastly, we have the Four Horsemen. This, I don't believe, could easily come back because we already had Shadowlands after all, and that would require some kind of war shenanigans that we would need to reopen the veil and go into Shadowlands and ask probably timers to craft the weapons, so that would be kind of complicated and confusing for new players, or players overall. So there is that. So now let's move on to our next weapon. Staff that was made in the battle against Deathwing, forged in the fires of Firelands. This staff holds the embodiment of the will and strength, wisdom of a promising blue dragon, Taritz Goza. She was a close friend with Khaled Goza, and with him we were able to make this grand staff, with which we managed to defeat Firelord Ragnaros. Potential wielders of this weapon could be Archmage Modera, Jaina, or even other members of Council of Six. My personal pick would be Archmage Modera. First reason is that Taritz Goza, in her humanoid form, used a lot of frost magic. And Modera is one of the more background characters when it comes to Council of Six, although she's the oldest member. But in the end, she doesn't do anything. But that's it. I wish there would be more about Modera, and Dragon Wrath could improve her position and potential in the story. Jaina is another choice because she in the end has good relationship with blue dragons, which makes her good potential wielder, but I don't think she would throw away the staff of Antonidas. And lastly, other members of the Council of Six. I don't believe they should get it, based on the thing I said earlier. Taritz Goza used frost magic in her humanoid form, so naturally, Modera, which is also frost mage, have the highest chance of getting it. When it comes to other members, they usually are either fire or arcane specialized, and that's why I believe that they wouldn't get it, but in the end they could. The last thing I wanted to mention are blue dragons. However, dragons don't usually build weapons because they can do magic out of nowhere, but in the end, Dragon Wrath is a weapon, is a staff of their fallen sister. If I were to choose two blue dragons who could have their hands on this weapon, those would be Stellagosa and Kalecgos. But as I mentioned, blue dragons don't usually build weapons, so the whole thing falls apart just like with a snap of fingers. And for the potential story, there could be some kind of connection to Azeroth. In War Within, there could be some kind of connection, ley lines and so on, because blue dragons after all can see ley lines in the underground, so there's that. And the potential wielder, let's just say Modera, in this case, could be some kind of bridge between Kirin Tor and Blue Dragonfly. Lastly, we have a bow that is not so legendary as previous weapons we mentioned. After all, this bow doesn't have that much lore behind it, and it's just a drop from Kil'jaeden in Sunwell Portal. And I am of course talking about Toridal, the Star's Fury. Now, finally, to our potential wielder. There are two obvious choices. Alduran, current Ranger General of Silvermoon, and Verisa Windrunner, youngest of Windrunner's sister. First, we shall talk about Alduran. Alduran, as a Ranger General, already wielded Toridal in a sun. During the attack on Zulaman, he had a bow that looked too similar, but we still don't know if that was indeed Toridal. But after that, Toridal was abandoned. But I believe Verisa, as the other choice, be much better suited. After all, Toridal is in high elven colors, similar design, let's just say. And of course, Verisa, at least as it is right now, as of end of Dragonflight 10.2, Verisa looks mostly like an ordinary high elven ranger, but that's about it. This could make her more unique. And with this, she could get some kind of power akin to what Sylvanas and Alleria have with Void and Death. But instead, it would be the purest High Elven power, the arcane power. And as potential story, there could be something in Midnight. Recap: Midnight is a story during which we will try to unite the elves. After all, Void will try to seize Sunwell, and Toridal has some kind of connection to Sunwell. And with this, Verisa could get some kind of spotlight with Toridal in place, and so on. As honorable mentions, I have Valanir, Thanks of the Father, and Azura, the Unbound Legacy. Valanir, I'd say there's no other choice than Magni. After all, Magni is the speaker of Azeroth, and that could be basically his weapon. Thanks of the Father, created by Rathion from the parts of Deathwing and his minions. This weapon should, I'd say, go to some closest bodyguard of Rathion. Maybe Jurak Ravenhold, since Rathion was born in Ravenhold after all. So maybe him. And lastly is Nazira, the Unbound Legacy. I'm not big fan of Draktyr lore, so maybe I will say something that doesn't make any sense. So please correct me in the comments down below if I say something wrong. But I'd say it should go to Scale Commander Emberthal. My reason is that Emberthal did all she could to save Draktyr and finally unite them after Sarkarath betrayed others. She isn't part of any faction, and from the perspective of her achievements that were done throughout Dragonflight, I believe she is worthy of this weapon. But also there could be other picks that I'm not considering at this moment. Anyway, thank you for your time, and don't forget to like, dislike, subscribe. Please don't forget to comment in the section down below. I'd be happy to read all the ideas you might have, or if you just like the ideas I presented in this video. It really doesn't matter. And stay cool, and see you in the next one. See ya!